Before I begin, let me say how much I admire Frank Schirmacher and the values that he stood for. It's definitely the reason why I did not want to miss this symposium. So, the Oxford English Dictionary just recently announced its Word of the Year for 2016. That word is post-truth. Oxford defines post-truth as circumstances in which emotional appeals are more important than facts in shaping public opinion. And I think that's a fair summary of 2016. It also coincides with a recent study in the journal Public Understanding of Science, which determined that scientific facts do not necessarily bring opposing sides together. Instead, the researchers found that opponents can just as easily disagree about what constitutes a fact. In effect, different groups can have opposing views and perceptions of reality itself. How is this possible when we have nearly instant access to the entirety of human knowledge through the internet? It's possible because the internet shares everything, medieval dogma and peer-reviewed research alike. So no matter how outrageous your beliefs are, you can almost certainly find a website that supports your view. Now, people have been disagreeing about facts for thousands of years, so it's nothing new. What is new is the rise of a social media ecosystem that automatically serves up our preferred brand of reality without our having to search for it, and which magnifies confirmation bias by silently determining what we see, and does so not on some obscure web forum, but on the same mainstream news feeds and timelines used by everyone else. So today, I'm going to discuss how social media can distort individual perceptions of reality, not just for fringe groups, but for all of us. I'll cover how this system works and why false information has a competitive advantage within it. And finally, I'll address how an open and democratic society should grapple with a massively popular technology that's helped enable our post-truth world. Now, we've seen the internet disrupt every industry, including the news media. News media's role is to help the public form a coherent narrative of world events. Put simply, to know what's happening and why. As the internet matured, walled social media gardens began to enclose the public conversation on the internet. And these platforms quickly began to rival traditional news media. Although social media has a very different goal from news media, which I'll go into later. Most of us participate in one or more social media platforms. By following other people, we seed the platform's algorithms in determining what posts we'll see, curating our own social circle. But the platform's algorithms also display posts you did not specifically request to see, using a probability model to find things that will interest you. Keeping you interested is important because the platforms want you to stay on the site and participating. It's the key to growing their stock price and their advertising revenue. In 2014, Mark Zuckerberg said of Facebook, quote, "Our goal is to build the perfect personalized newspaper for everyone in the world, to show you the stuff most interesting to you. End quote. Okay, so what is most interesting to us? Facebook's research showed that we're interested in anything we agree with. It turns out people interact more often and longer with content that they agree with versus content that they disagree with. And this finding was soon reflected in the algorithms populating user news feeds. Not everyone thinks this is good for us. Hossein Darakhshan, an author and online activist, jailed for 6 years by Iranian authorities, says this, quote, "Social media algorithms encourage comfort and complacence, since its entire business model is built on maximizing the time users spend inside of it. Who would want to hang out in a place where everyone seems negative, mean, and disapproving?" End quote. He went on to compare social media to television in that it primarily appealed to emotion, not rational discourse. But remember, rational discourse is not the purpose of social media. The purpose of social media is to drive clicks and shares, which is why we're likely to see posts containing opinions we agree with. Even when a post makes us angry, it's usually because someone in our social circle is pointing out something you should be angry about too. A sentiment we'll agree with by liking and sharing their outrage. And if a social media post we don't agree with gets through to us, tuning people out is far easier than justifying our own positions. It only takes a click to block or mute somebody. This self-sorting is where the trouble lies, because whether we know it or not, social media encourages us to curate our own version of reality. Cocooned in a social media circle, it's easy to convince yourself that your belief dominates, when in fact your point of view might not only be in the minority, but is literally invisible to those who disagree with you. That's because, like you, they don't often see posts that they disagree with. Social media is not a digital commons. It's not there to make sure everyone gets heard. It's designed to keep you coming back, viewing, and sharing. Importantly, the algorithms curating our news feeds and timelines do not comprehend the meaning or validity of anything we're sharing. They only calculate the relative shareworthiness of a post based on how other humans interact with it. And while traditional newspapers are sometimes sleazy, there are significant costs in starting up a newspaper merely to publish outrageous fabrications. And tabloid journalism doesn't ever appear in serious news. However, distributing news over social media is different. There's no cost to creating an account, even for a business entity. And there's a lot to be gained by garnering millions of clicks and shares and likes. The only obstacle is rising above the background noise through any means available. If enough users respond to your posts, liking and sharing, the platform's algorithms will uncritically surface your content in more news feeds, sometimes right alongside posts from major news sources, all of which is immensely useful in generating revenue through advertising affiliates. The more views and clicks you attract, the more money you make. And remember, people like and share what they agree with, even if it's agreeing with others how terrible something is. Which is why in social media, false stories that arouse powerful emotion have a competitive advantage over those that deal in facts. For one thing, false information is much easier to produce. You don't need to research anything, which means you can supply a steady stream of it. And fake news can be tailored and perfectly timed to a target audience. Do you need a healthcare news item guaranteed to enrage senior citizens? No problem, just make it up. You just have to make sure that your information is real enough that confirmation bias will enable people to believe it. One of the most successful publishers of fake news on Facebook is National Report. Describing itself as a satire news site, they specialize in getting gullible readers to share rage-inducing reports on American topics such as gun control, abortion, or President Obama. Posts designed to confirm the worst fears of conservatives. When asked about their social media strategy in a recent interview, National Report's founder, Justin Kohler, said, quote, "We really go for confirmation bias," end quote. National Report's fake news articles have been so widely liked and shared in social media that they sometimes leak into reality. After their article about Colorado public assistance money being used to buy marijuana went viral, the Colorado state legislature introduced an actual bill to ban the practice, even though it wasn't occurring. Justin Kohler's response to this was to say simply, "That was a fun one for me." It's not hard to get people to share stuff, to get right-wing folks all riled up. It's kind of scary how easy it is, actually. Capably done, the successful social media post ultimately appears in mainstream news. For example, a completely fabricated gun control story from National Report found its way into a December 2015 New York Times gun control editorial. A recent analysis of more than 1,000 American Facebook posts from across the political spectrum found that the least accurate pages registered the highest user engagement. So factual information is at a disadvantage in social media. For example, here is a tweet from Caltech University's main Twitter account. This tweet is based on factual and important information. Caltech scientists have at last solved one of the greatest mysteries of experimental physics. The mystery they solved was how high-temperature superconducting materials work. That discovery could have major implications in the real world, and the link explained why. This Caltech tweet required funding from 3 separate institutions and thousands of research hours from highly educated people. It was important news that may impact all of us. It received 32 likes and 15 retweets. By contrast, here's a tweet from Donald Trump from 4 years ago. This is long before he ran for president. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. This performed a little better. It was offered without evidence, and none has been forthcoming since. Accounting for the difference in Twitter followers between Caltech and Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has 500 times as many followers, Trump's unsupported but emotionally charged tweet outperformed Caltech's factual one, gaining 5 times the number of likes per follower and 15 times as many retweets per follower. Let's recall that this social media hall of mirrors was designed just to keep us sharing and liking posts. Why? To serve up ads to keep the platform's user base growing, to satisfy investors. But as it turns out, this architecture strongly favors emotion over reality, and that's a problem. Separating fact from fiction is vital in a world that relies increasingly on science to keep our large populations alive and safe. And science is under particular threat in this social media ecosystem. I'd like to read a quote from Carl Sagan's 1997 book, Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Darkness. And here, Sagan refers to America, but this sentiment, I think, applies globally. He says, "Science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking. I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. When the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide, almost without noticing, back into superstitions and darkness." End quote. We would today replace the words crystals and horoscopes with smartphone and newsfeed. But you can see how true it is. How does a democratic civil society address the spread of fake news in social media? I don't think censorship is the answer. Some have proposed that social media platforms flag incorrect posts as satirical. And this could be accomplished through a combination of algorithms and user feedback mechanisms. What I like about this approach is that a visible satire flag can be objected to. It can spark petitions for redress, even lawsuits, but the content will remain for users to see, which is important because by marking fake news as satirical, as opposed to hiding or deleting it, we mitigate the confirmation bias at the heart of social media. But I also think that a satire flag on fake news is just a stopgap measure. It won't really correct the problem. A technologically advanced democratic society must place the same value on critical analytic thinking that it does on basic literacy itself. Because without the ability to sift fact from opinion on their own, the modern citizen is helpless, no matter what technology is available to them. That's why I believe we should revive formal logic as a discipline in schools, teaching students early to determine truth from falsehood and to avoid well-known fallacies. One might imagine a grade school class where students are shown emotion-provoking viral videos like those they see in social media, with the teacher asking, "Okay, kids, what mistakes in logic can you see here?" If students learn at an early age how to weigh arguments for themselves, they'll be better citizens, and they can begin to tune out false arguments. And when false arguments are no longer competitive, in true Darwinian forms, their numbers should dwindle. It's true that this approach will take decades, but the critical challenges facing humanity will require it. And it's also preferable to building yet another technical fix. The goal here is to retain human agency and civil society in the face of rapid technological disruption. Relying on human intelligence as opposed to technical fixes is, I think, the best way to retain our humanity and also our grip on reality. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Daniel. Next is Dr. Jan Kalbitzer. Du wirst auf Deutsch sprechen. Okay, gut.
Genau, und ohne so ein Mikrofon, die gehen, ja? Gut. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, die Frage dieser Session ist, wie Digitalisierung unser Denken beeinflusst. Und dazu gibt es viele kluge Dinge zu sagen. Ich glaube jedoch, dass die Frage nach den Gedanken allein uns nur bedingt weiterhilft. Die meisten Menschen kommen zu mir in Behandlung und sagen, ich weiß eigentlich ganz genau, was ich anders machen sollte, damit alles besser wird. Ich schaffe es trotzdem nicht, mein Verhalten zu ändern. Denn das Problem liegt meistens nicht in der Frage, wie wir uns vom Beobachten eines Gegenstands zur richtigen Einsicht bewegen, sondern darin, wie sich aus Einsicht Bewegung und somit Veränderung entwickeln kann. Und um dies besser erläutern zu können, möchte ich mit einer kleinen Geschichte anfangen. Ich habe Medizin studiert, weil ich ein sicherheitsbedürftiger Mensch bin und habe mich dann als Psychiater sowohl ärztlich als auch wissenschaftlich viel mit menschlichem Verhalten beschäftigt. Mein Bruder war mutiger und ist Primatologe geworden, weshalb er in vielen Ländern des afrikanischen Kontinents unterwegs war. Da wäre ich mit meiner Angst vor Malaria, Schlangen und anderen in Mitteleuropa bislang weit entfernten Gefahren freiwillig nie hingefahren. Aber irgendwann kam ich nicht mehr umhin, mich doch zu seinem Camp in einem Nationalpark im Senegal aufzumachen, um ihm einen Besuch abzustatten. Es war das Ende der Regenzeit. Wir waren den 3. Tag in Folge auf Anreise und befanden uns auf der Fahrt von der letzten größeren Stadt in den Dschungel hinein, als der Fahrer auf einmal meinte, er könne uns zwar zum Camp hinbringen, aber ob wir in den nächsten Tagen wieder rauskommen würden, sei aufgrund der großen Pfützen und der teilweise weggeschwemmten Piste eher fraglich. Bei Erreichen des Camps befand ich mich somit schon in einem Zustand leichter Unruhe. Zur Begrüßung gab es Reis mit Maggi und 5 Tage altem Fleisch, das durchgehend ungekühlt gelagert worden war und dadurch neben einem sehr kräftigen Geschmack seltsame schwarze Verfärbung entwickelt hatte. Ich bekam noch in der ersten Nacht eine Lebensmittelvergiftung, als Arzt wohlwissend, dass meine Malaria-Prophylaxe dadurch weitestgehend wirkungslos geworden war. Zu diesem Zeitpunkt befand ich mich schon in einem Zustand diffuser Angst. Und dann kam der Höhepunkt der Geschichte. Ich traf in der als Toilette genutzten, etwas abgelegenen Lehmhütte, mitten im Dschungel, mitten in der Nacht, auf eine Kobra, die in diesem Moment glücklicherweise deutlich gelassener war als ich. Und die Kobra, die war nicht irgendwo in dieser Lehmhütte, sondern ich wollte meine Taschenlampe auf so ein Mäuerchen drauflegen vor meiner Nase und die war hier. Und ich habe das gemacht, was man gar nicht machen darf. Ich bin dann weggesprungen und habe das glücklicherweise überlebt. Und man lernt so die verschiedenen Perspektiven kennen. Die Biologen im Camp meinten dann, du hast eine Kobra gesehen, Mensch, und haben mich beneidet darum. Mein bislang kleiner Bruder wusste sofort, was zu tun war, damit ich nicht in heillose Panik verfiel. Während er mir das notdürftig gefilterte Wasser und dem Moskitonetz meines Krankenbetts durchschub, meinte er sanft, im nächsten Dorf lebt ein älteres Ehepaar, das sich immer die FAZ aus Europa schicken lässt. Soll ich dir vielleicht ein paar Ausgaben ausleihen, damit du Ablenkung hast? Da war ich durch die Neugier gleich halb genesen. Warum lässt sich denn ein älteres senegalesisches Ehepaar in einem abgelegenen Dorf im Dschungel eine deutsche Zeitung schicken, die hier nach Tagen bis Wochen mit völlig veralteten Nachrichten eintrifft? Na, wegen des Feuilletons, meinte mein Bruder lachend. Das war im Sommer 2012. Ich erzähle Ihnen diese Geschichte, um zu verdeutlichen, welche tiefgreifende Bedeutung das intellektuelle Lebenswerk Schirmachers in einer sehr kritischen Situation meines Lebens hatte. Und zum anderen, weil sie ein guter Ausgangspunkt ist, um über die Auswirkungen des Internets auf unsere Gedanken und unser Verhalten nachzudenken und dabei auf die Bedeutung von Gefühlen einzugehen. Grundsätzlich glaube ich nicht, dass Psychiater und Wissenschaftler eine nachhaltige Aussage darüber machen können, wie das Internet die Psyche verändert. Denn das Internet verändert sich und die Menschen verändern sich auch. Und sie gewöhnen sich auch daran, wie an bisher jede neue Technologie. Diesem Prozess können wir mit unserem klassischen Studiendesign meistens nur hinterherlaufen. Stattdessen möchte ich Ihnen 2 sehr alte, ganz typische Muster vorstellen, die die beiden Enden eines Kontinuums menschlichen Verhaltens darstellen. Anhand dieser Muster möchte ich menschliche Reaktionen auf und den Umgang mit dem Internet diskutieren, davon ableiten, wie wir ein gutes Verhältnis zu der Technologie finden können, die uns hilft, nicht Sklaven unserer Impulse zu werden, sondern rational zu bleiben und Autonomie zu bewahren. Beginnen möchte ich mit der freundlicheren der beiden Verhaltensmuster. Wenn wir unsere Umwelt zu Recht oder zu Unrecht als sicher empfinden, dann werden wir gelassener. Wir konzentrieren uns auf die Dinge direkt vor unserer Nase, die dann meistens etwas mit Essen, körperlicher Nähe oder Spielen zu tun haben. Wir kümmern uns meistens nicht so sehr darum, welche äußeren Kriterien soziale Interaktionspartner erfüllen, solange sie recht freundlich sind und wir keinen akuten Grund haben, sie zu fürchten. Wenn wir unsere Umwelt jedoch als bedrohlicher empfinden, weil zum Beispiel weniger Ressourcen vorhanden sind, um die mehr Menschen konkurrieren, dann ändert sich unser Verhalten meistens und wir legen ein sehr gegensätzliches Muster an den Tag. Unsere Aufmerksamkeit richtet sich dann nicht mehr so sehr auf die Dinge direkt vor unserer Nase, sondern schweift diffus, immer bereit, auch kleinste, unspezifische Reize zu registrieren, um keine potenzielle Bedrohung zu verpassen. Unsere Reaktionen auf diese Reize sind in diesem Modus auch deutlich weniger differenziert und richten sich zuallererst mal nach einem Schwarz-Weiß-Schema, nach dem wir zunächst einmal grundsätzlich in freundlich oder feindlich unterscheiden und auf alles, was wir als feindlich einordnen, mit Ablehnung reagieren. Wir reagieren zudem vorwiegend auf unsere unmittelbaren Bedürfnisse, stopfen also schneller auch mal ungesundes Essen in uns hinein oder zerstreiten uns aufgrund von Kleinigkeiten, weil uns im Impuls der Wut die langfristigen Folgen weniger wichtig sind. Das kann ein überlebensnotwendiges Verhaltensmuster sein, wenn wir uns wirklich in einer bedrohlichen Situation befinden. Wenn wir uns aber verschätzen und diesen Modus aufgrund von Fehlinterpretationen einschalten, dann wird unser Leben verdammt ungemütlich. Das Schöne an uns Menschen ist aber, dass wir dem Ganzen nicht hilflos ausgeliefert sind. Wir haben die Fähigkeit, innere Distanz zu Dingen einzunehmen und sie zu reflektieren. Und aus dieser Haltung heraus können wir dann entscheiden, wie wir uns verhalten wollen. Das nennt man rationales Handeln. Es gibt aber eine Fähigkeit, die wir Menschen dazu brauchen. Wir müssen in der Lage sein, nicht unmittelbar zu reagieren, sondern unsere entstehenden Gefühle und Handlungsimpulse auszuhalten, bis wir uns ausreichend mit ihnen auseinandergesetzt haben und kurz- und langfristige Konsequenzen gegeneinander abgewogen haben. Und um diese Fähigkeit mache ich mir aktuell deutlich mehr Sorgen als darum, wie sich das Internet auf unsere Merkfähigkeit oder unseren Orientierungssinn auswirkt. Im psychiatrischen Jargon nennt man sie Containment. Je größer unser innerer Container ist, in dem wir Gefühle, Widersprüche, Ungewissheiten aushalten können, ohne unmittelbar auf etwas reagieren zu müssen, desto ausgeprägter ist unsere Fähigkeit, rational zu handeln. Schöner als dieses Fachwort finde ich noch den nah verwandten, psychiatrisch aber weniger gebräuchlichen Begriff der Contenance, der eine Haltung von Bescheidenheit und Selbstbeherrschung vereint. Aber obwohl ich finde, dass sich Contenance für nahezu alle Lebensbereiche empfiehlt, halte ich es für akzeptabel, sie in manchen Situationen auch kurzfristig zu verlieren. Zum Beispiel, wenn man darüber nachdenkt, dass wir es Unternehmen überlassen, im öffentlichen Raum unseres digitalen Lebens zu entscheiden, was freie Meinungsäußerung ist und was eine inakzeptable Beleidigung. Oder was Kunst ist und was als anstößig zensiert werden muss. Oder dass wir es ihnen durchgehen lassen, dass sie die Grundfesten unserer Welt erschüttern, indem sie eine Plattform für Fake News und andere Unwahrheiten bieten. Und das alles in Anbetracht der Tatsachen, wie auch mein Vorredner gesagt hat, dass das Geschäftsmodell des Unternehmens darin besteht, dass wir unsere Selbstbeherrschung verlieren und uns unseren Impulsen hingeben. Vielleicht liegt genau darin das große Problem, den öffentlichen Raum zurückzugewinnen, weil sich im Bedürfnis angeschaut, geliked und von möglichst vielen Menschen geklickt zu werden, das kommerzielle Interesse der Unternehmen und das Bedürfnis nach Aufmerksamkeit wichtiger gesellschaftlicher Akteure sehr ungünstig überschneidet. Die Frage der Sucht hat ja beim Thema Internet eine ungebrochene Konjunktur. Insofern lassen Sie es mich einmal so sagen. Die menschlichen Probleme, die beim Umgang mit den sozialen Medien eine wirkliche Gefahr darstellen, sind Habsucht und Geltungssucht. Die Gefahr einer Internetsucht würde ich aufgrund der Bedrohlichkeit dieser Phänomene eher hinten anstellen. Dass Menschen sich in Emotionen hineinsteigern und zunehmend aus Impulsen heraus handeln, bedarf allerdings keiner neuen Technologie. Aber neue Kommunikationsmedien können die Dynamik verstärken. Und gerade das Internet macht hier einen dramatischen Unterschied in der Geschwindigkeit, die die gesamte Dynamik verändert. Informationen kommen eben nur noch sehr selten mit Tagen bis Wochen Verzögerung irgendwo an. Auch im Camp Simenti im Senegal gibt es mittlerweile ganz sicher stabiles mobiles Internet. Und damit müssen wir umgehen lernen. Dazu vielleicht ein aktuelles Beispiel. Weite Teile der Gesellschaft haben mit großer Besorgnis die Wahlen in den USA beobachtet, angeheizt von drastischen, teilweise gefälschten Enthüllungsgeschichten und zynischen Kommentaren über die Kandidaten aller Lager. Ich sehe wirklich keinen zusätzlichen Vorteil darin, wenn dann deutsche Bundesminister, einflussreiche Akademiker und wichtige Medienvertreter nach einer langen Wahlnacht vor aller Öffentlichkeit ihre Gefühle des Schreckens und der Besorgnis in sozialen Medien ausbreiten und dafür auch noch massive Aufmerksamkeit einfahren und die Menschen um sie herum noch weiter in die emotionale Erregung treiben. Denn bei allem realistischen Grund zur Sorge und der Notwendigkeit, öffentlich eine klare Position zu beziehen, wir sind für eine Zukunft voller großer Herausforderungen nicht besser gewappnet, wenn die Gesellschaft durch sich gegenseitig aufschaukelnde emotionale Nachrichten von gewählten und nicht gewählten Repräsentanten der Republik in Panik verfällt. Im Gegenteil, wir, die wir das Glück medialer Aufmerksamkeit haben, weil wir klassische oder moderne Medien gestalten oder für sie schreiben, oder weil wir in den sozialen Medien Reichweite und Einfluss erlangt haben und damit die Möglichkeit, die Welt, in der wir leben, nachhaltiger mitzugestalten. Und wir Vertreter von Institutionen, auch Universitäten, so wie ich, genau wir haben die große Verantwortung, Einfluss zu nehmen und gegebenenfalls gegenzusteuern, wenn die Spirale der Eskalation sich immer weiter dreht. Die Aufmerksamkeit und Macht, die wir haben, geht aus meiner Sicht immer auch mit der Pflicht einher, sich nicht zu Sklaven der Geschäftsmodelle großer Unternehmen zu machen, sondern Vorbild zu sein. Ein Vorbild an Kontenance und aktive Gestalter, indem wir die Gefühle, die wir in Anbetracht von bedrohlichen Entwicklungen haben, nicht ungefiltert in die Medien pumpen, um Aufmerksamkeit und Klicks zu generieren, sondern sie in uns halten und nach außen Halt geben. Wir alle können unseren Kindern in der Schule und zu Hause noch so viel Medienkompetenz beibringen, härtere Strafen für Hass und Beleidigung fordern und betuliche Ratschläge geben und Manuale entwerfen. Wenn wir, die wir am meisten von der digitalen Aufmerksamkeitsmaschine profitieren, keine Vorbilder sind, dann werden unsere Rufe ungehört verhallen und unsere Regelwerke nur Widerstand hervorrufen. Natürlich bedeutet das auch eine Gefahr für uns. Für Zeitungsmacher, Public Intellectuals, Akademiker wie mich, dessen nächste Forschungsförderung natürlich auch vom öffentlichen Interesse an meinem Thema und meiner medialen Präsenz abhängig ist. Aufmerksamkeit bedeutet für uns einen Marktwert und ein Zurückschrauben der Dramatik kann damit zu einer Bedrohung für die persönliche Lebensqualität und mitunter auch Existenz werden. Aber wir müssen trotzdem damit anfangen. Denn was passiert, wenn wir das nicht tun, können wir wie in einem großen Experiment aktuell beobachten. Ein Experiment, das anmutet wie eine Vorbereitung auf eine komplexe Form der Augmented Reality. Die meisten Orte, an denen wir uns bewegen, sind sicherer denn je. Aber durch die Flut an negativen Informationen im digitalen Raum und die zunehmende Dynamik und Aggressionen in der alltäglichen Kommunikation werden sie trotzdem als immer bedrohlicher erlebt. Durch unser Verhalten tragen wir dazu bei, dass sich eine virtuelle Bedrohlichkeit über das eigentlich sichere Leben in unserer Gesellschaft legt. Und diese Verzerrung der Realität führt wiederum dazu, dass viele Menschen sich in diesem reichen Land mit einem ausgezeichneten medizinischen Versorgungssystem, einem guten Bildungssystem, einer hohen Lebenserwartung und einem relativ geringen Grad an Korruption so verhalten, als befänden sie sich in einem Zustand akuter Bedrohung. Das lässt sich besonders gut in den sozialen Medien erkennen, wo zunehmend genau dieses Verhaltensmuster dominiert, das Menschen an den Tag legen, die das Gefühl haben, sich in einer bedrohlichen Umwelt zu befinden. Ein immer größerer Teil der Gesellschaft reagiert dort schneller und undifferenzierter, unterscheidet immer stärker zwischen wir und die anderen, fühlt sich permanent ungerecht behandelt, ungeachtet der Sicherheit, die uns im Alltag oft umgibt. Und daraus entwickelt sich ein Teufelskreis, weil sich alle immer bedrohter fühlen und die Verhaltensmuster sich dadurch permanent verstärken. Noch einmal ganz deutlich, die Verantwortung, diesen Teufelskreis zu durchbrechen, liegt bei uns, bei Ihnen und bei mir. Der Finger muss in unsere Richtung zeigen. Das heißt nicht, dass wir betulich und pseudoverständnisvoll auf offensichtliches Unrecht reagieren müssen. Es heißt eben gerade, dass die Zeit der worthaltig gefühligen Ausreden vorbei sein muss. Das Problem ist nur, viele von uns sind verunsichert und haben selbst Angst. Und nicht wenige sind wütend über die Ungerechtigkeit, die Hemmungslosigkeit, die Fahrlässigkeit derer, die profitieren von der Erosion unserer Gesellschaft. Für mich als Psychiater sind Angst und Wut aber gar nicht per se negative Gefühle. Angst kann uns vor Gefahren warnen und dazu bewegen, notwendige Vorkehrungen zu treffen. Und Wut kann uns antreiben, trotz Angst für Veränderung zu kämpfen, zum Beispiel, weil wir die Ungerechtigkeit eines repressiven Systems nicht mehr ertragen können. Das Problem liegt vielmehr darin, dass die Dynamik, die das Ganze angenommen hat, eine Bewegung mehr aufeinander zu und zu etwas Neuem, Positiven hin oft verhindert, weil wir aus der Angst und Wut heraus und oft auch daraus resultierenden Verzweiflung nicht mehr herausfinden. In der Psychotherapie würde ich versuchen, einem Menschen voll Angst und Wut zu einer besseren Selbstwirksamkeit zu verhelfen, also dem Gefühl, die Welt, die einen umgibt, durch aktives Handeln zum Positiven beeinflussen zu können. Dazu würde ich meinen Patienten motivieren, sich in die Welt zu trauen und aktiv zu werden. Das muss nichts Großes sein. Die Kraft kommt meistens von allein wieder zurück, wenn man einmal den Weg beschritten hat. Aber woraus sollen wir in Zeiten wie diesen die Kraft schöpfen, weiter zu handeln und den Mut nicht zu verlieren, sondern trotz aller Ungewissheiten und Schreckensszenarien nach vorne zu schauen und dem Neuen und Fremden, das unweigerlich auf uns zukommt, nicht mit Angst und Wut zu begegnen, sondern lustvoll und mutig und wenn nötig kämpferisch darauf zuzugehen. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, ich habe Frank Schirmacher nicht persönlich gekannt, denn ich habe erst verhältnismäßig spät angefangen, mich am öffentlichen, gesellschaftlichen Diskurs zu beteiligen. Aber vielleicht hätte ich mal bei der FAZ anrufen sollen. Das tat ich erst im Mai 2015, als nach der Öffnung der Ehe für gleichgeschlechtliche Paare in Irland ein abstruser Artikel in der FAZ erschienen war, in dem die Argumentation vertreten wurde, nur wer Kinder bekommen könne, dürfe auch heiraten. Nachdem ein direkter Kommunikationsversuch mit dem Autor des Kommentars gescheitert war, wählte ich die Nummer der FAZ-Zentrale und bat darum, mit einem Herausgeber zu sprechen. Zu meiner Überraschung wurde ich durchgestellt. Und ich glaube, dass mir in diesem Gespräch klar wurde, dass die FAZ, die jahrelang mein intellektuelles Zuhause gewesen war, in dieser Form nicht mehr existiert. Weil es Schirmachers Feuilleton nicht mehr gibt und nicht mehr geben kann. Denn was dieses Feuilleton ausgemacht hat, waren nicht allein die brillanten Autoren und spannenden Themen, sondern eine Kraft und eine Geisteshaltung. Diese Geisteshaltung hat genau diese Richtung auf das Neue, Fremde, Unbekannte zu, die wir heute brauchen, um aus dem Teufelskreis der emotionalen Impulsivität auszubrechen. Um wieder zu Handelnden zu werden und aus dem Gefühl der Handlungsfähigkeit Kraft zu schöpfen. Um wieder zu autonomen Wesen zu werden und nicht Marionetten der kommerziellen Interessen großer Konzerne. Oder hilflose Opfer perfider psychologischer Angriffe auf unsere Psyche durch die Profiteure des Hasses in unserer Welt. Im Kern dieser Geisteshaltung steht eine Eigenschaft, die Neugier. Es war die Neugier auf eine Zeitung, die mich in einem Zustand tiefer Panik wieder zu einer handelnden Person werden ließ und aus der Spirale der Angst befreite. Und es ist die Neugier, die uns allen in unserem langen Kampf für eine bessere Zukunft das lustvolle Element gibt, das uns vor der Verzweiflung bewahrt. Selten war diese Geisteshaltung der Neugier an einem Ort so stark zu spüren wie zur Schirmachers Zeit im Feuilleton der FAZ. Und auch wenn dieses Feuilleton, das für viele von uns ein intellektuelles Zuhause war, so nie wieder existieren wird, so sollten wir nicht im Gefühl der Heimatlosigkeit erstarren. Es ist Schirmachers Geisteshaltung der intellektuellen Autonomie, getrieben von der Kraft einer unbändigen Neugier, die wir als Erbe bewahren müssen. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich will vor der Diskussion noch so 2, 3 einführende Worte sagen. Die Frage, wie Technologie unser Denken beeinflusst, ist ja im Kern die Frage danach, wie ändert sich unser Menschsein, welche Auswirkungen hat unser zunehmendes Cyborg-Dasein. Und wenn wir in unsere Hosentaschen gucken, sehen wir da immer mehr Anzeichen dafür, dass wir schon tatsächlich Cyborgs sind, dass wir eigentlich ohne Technologie nicht mehr wirklich auskommen können. Wie stark ändert sich dabei unsere Fähigkeit zur Wahrnehmung der Welt, die Möglichkeit, das Leben zum Besseren und Schöneren zu formen? Und die Diskussion heute von Daniel und Jan, die angestoßenen Inputs, drehten sich eigentlich um einen Kern, nämlich die Frage, welches Recht wollen wir anderen Menschen einräumen, uns zu manipulieren? Unsere Gesellschaft beruht darauf, dass wir einander versuchen, von Argumenten zu überzeugen, von Meinungen zu überzeugen. Wir tolerieren Werbung im Sinne von, jemand versucht uns etwas zu verkaufen, weil wir wollen ja gerne Wachstum haben, wir wollen gerne Arbeitsplätze haben, wir möchten, dass sich das Rad immer weiter dreht. Aber wir sind jetzt an dem Punkt angekommen, wo wir erreicht haben, etwas, was Daniel Suarez in einem Interview, was ich mit ihm vor mehreren Jahren in der FAZ gemacht hat, so beschrieben hat, gesagt, der menschliche Geist ist aus der Sicht eines Machine Learning-Algorithmus ein unbewegliches Ziel. Das, was wir über den Menschen lernen können, über wie er denkt, wie er handelt, wie durchschnittlich sich seine Gedanken entwickeln, ist relativ einfach zu verstehen, wenn man genügend Daten über diese Menschen zur Verfügung hat. Und was wir jetzt gerade gesehen haben, Cambridge Analytics war sicherlich schon Thema heute, die Frage, ist akute Manipulation von Wahlen in Entscheidungssituationen, wo wir sagen können, es geht um die Wurst, technologisch unterfüttert, mittlerweile soweit möglich, dass wir uns darum kümmern müssen. Und wahrscheinlich wird es sich nicht umgehen lassen, zu sagen, wir müssen handeln, wir müssen auch gesetzgeberisch handeln, wir müssen Möglichkeiten finden, sowas wie das Targeting von Facebook zu unterbinden. Und sagen, schönes Geschäftsmodell habt ihr da, leider ist dieses Geschäftsmodell inkompatibel mit der Zukunft einer Menschheit auf diesem Planeten. Tut uns wirklich leid, sucht euch ein anderes. Jan, Daniel, would you join me on the stage?
Auf English or?
Yeah, we do it.
Okay.
Yes, so we need test. Thank you. So we do the debate in English, otherwise it would be a little bit awkward with the translation. I hope.
Sorry.
Has everybody translation devices who needs a translation device? Okay, fine. So Daniel, joining basically onto your old quote regarding the human mind as a stationary target.
Yes.
That was, I think, 4 years ago, 5 years ago that you
Yes,
said it?
2011.
Yeah. So what do you think, how far have we come onto that axis of the human mind being explorable by machines to a point where manipulation could be becoming automatic? I mean, if you think a little bit ahead, we have already news bots who write stories already. And so basically the next logical step is building a fake news bot that writes targeted fake news based on a personality profile.
Yes, if it's not already happening. But when I talked today about the idea that we would go back to the roots of formal logic, and these are immovable things. In other words, if something is inherently true and something is inherently false, that still holds true. And right now, we don't have, the average person really doesn't have any tools to try to defend themselves. I think it's a good start, but back in 2011, when I was talking about how humans evolve very slowly, how the human brain is an immovable target and software is exponentially increasing, we're not even in the game at this point. I feel that we're just completely vulnerable. Most people aren't even aware that this is happening. So I think it needs to be a combination of these types of technical fixes where you have, for fake news, a satire flag or some sort of technological aid, but we do need to start thinking how to use what we have, the intelligence we already have. And I don't think we use it. Because I've seen school systems that do a great job of educating people. It's not impossible.
So from a psychological point of view, would a satire flag work? So would it work that you not get an explicit "this is fake news" mark, but then could be satire humor?
Does this one work? Yeah. Well, first of all, I must say that I do not believe that these elections were basically won by fake news. I think they were won by Trump's instinct. I think he has a great instinct how to influence people. And I think that we all who are so scared about this Cambridge Analytics thing right now, we just add to the advertisements. They have for them it's like a machine now. Everybody's quoting them, and we don't see any details about how they actually do that. We're just all scared talking about it. And so we add to their success by talking about them all the time. And I don't think we should do that. I'm not quite sure. I'm not so worried about social media because maybe I'm not so deep into it. Friends I feel like the one who's not so deep into the internet here because friends tell me, well, you're neutral about the internet, and I am. And so when I go to social media, I see lots of stuff, and I feel able to judge that. And I believe more in your attempt to educate people better. And I don't think, first of all, I don't know how to flag things, and I would rather take it the other way around. This is a bit difficult to say, but I would agree to Professor Hoffmann-Riem that we need to control the whole companies. We need to say to a company, if you don't take care that fake news are not a problem on your platform, you can't work here because it destroys our society. I don't think we can do that with flags, but I'm not, when it comes to the details of social media, I'm not an expert.
Yeah, but you're an expert on psychology, and the thing that, if you look at digital media, starting from old stuff like email lists, probably many people here have been on email lists where the discussions completely escalated to a point where you thought, what happened here just within the last 24 hours? And if you look at the problematic things, you mentioned some of them. One of them is the immediacy. It's basically on your phone, in your inbox all the time. You get it right in your face, and you're not having a context for that. So it's basically all the time there. And you have been kind of arguing not for a social media diet, but a sort of getting to a more conscious use of times of day or times of week or whatever when you expose yourself to that. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, the thing is, I'm actually quite positive that we will be able to do that by our nature a bit, because when I got 2 emails today, and one was by Bahncard, which is the German railway system, and the other one was an update by Goodreads that Katrin Passig, who came here too, read a book and I should read it as well. And I didn't get any more emails, and I never get emails on the weekends. And we adapt to things quite quickly. And there's this beautiful study by Kraut and colleagues that was done in the late 90s, which we can't do that like that anymore today, because they looked at people for 2 years that just got plugged into the internet, and then they followed them up and they said, okay, these people, they all get depressed, and they have less friends, and they interact less socially. And everybody's quoting that study from Kraut et al. But Kraut was a good researcher, so he did a follow-up study, and 2 years later, the whole effect was gone. So this was an early effect of the internet. When people got used to it, it changed because we get used to it, and then things get a bit boring, and they don't get so intense anymore, and we adapt to it. And so I think, I'm not so worried. I think we will be able to adapt to that. We need a bit of reason, and we need a bit of containment, but we will be able to adapt to it. And we need to force companies to follow our rules. And I think that, especially in those times we have now, Europe should be like a safe place where we take care that these rules are followed and that reason is what guides them.
So Daniel, you have been written on the latest book, Influx, about technology control, essentially.
Yeah.
So basically the idea that, in your case, a secretive organization that wants to control technological progress. And so there's especially in Germany, there's always this undertone of, okay, we need to control technical progress, we kind of need to get our hands onto that. And so what do you think about these debates from the perspective of somebody who has thought the 100 years ahead?
Yeah, notice that in my book Influx, by the way, I'll do the quick pitch. It basically is that there is a secretive organization that it was an offshoot of the government that is hoarding technological progress with the idea that they want to prevent social disruption. And the impulse sounds good, but of course the end result is they have a huge power imbalance over us all. And that is, of course, a metaphorical story. I don't like people to think that I think that the government's hiding anti-gravity from us. But what I was trying to get at was the idea that technological change, I mean, once the time has come for a technology, trying to stop it is really almost impossible, particularly if it has utility. And about the only thing we can do is influence the direction it takes or how we respond to it. And so the difference I felt with Influx is here were people trying to hide it and make decisions about it for us on their own. And I think that there's a process by which we ingest technology, society, whether it's radio, the telegraph, photography, anything. It takes us a couple of decades to figure out how we reorganize ourselves around it. And it's typically a very vicious debate. It's contentious, people sue each other, people argue over privacy. I remember this, and I'm trying to remember the book, but does anybody have the memory of this Brownie camera? It was 1900, it was, I think, the first Kodak camera. And this was a portable camera you could carry around and take pictures in the street. And people lost their minds. They thought, oh my God, privacy is dead. It's 1900 and privacy is dead. And we obviously have moved on. We're not upset about that. And I think we all recall how when smartphones first came out, everybody was convinced that you go to the gym and somebody's going to take pictures of you. I haven't heard that in years. People just got past it. So,
but that actually happens.
It does. It does. But it's funny that you don't hear about it anymore. I think what it is we start a process by which people vigorously debate each other on how we're going to incorporate. Now, Jan, you were talking about how we basically have to rely on government and each other, and to me, government is us. So if we communicate to the government, we go and petition again for redress, we argue, this is part of that process. And that process may include lawsuits, it may include protest, all of those things. And then I think eventually over time, even private industry finds what level society will tolerate. And then it happens to find its balance.
But the thing is that I like that a lot because I believe that if we want to have courage, if we want to increase courage, we need to give people the feeling of having agency. Agency is very important. And what you say about us being the government, I think is right. We need to regain agency.
Yes.
And by that can regain courage. And I love the discussion we have. And I think, as I said, fear can be a very powerful motivation to shape the society, and anger is a strong motivation, as long as we don't fight each other on a black-white scheme. So we can use that energy and design the society we want. I'm actually quite happy that we sit here and discuss how we would like to live together as humans in the future. I think that's a beautiful discussion, and if that is caused by the internet, it had a good cause. I mean, it had a good input.
So coming back to your society has possible natural lines of what it can tolerate at the moment. Google had this concept of the creepy line. So the creepy line was an internal concept where they said, okay, when a certain technology surpasses the creepy line, they will not ship it. So this was one of the things why there was at first no face recognition on Google Glass, which I would love to have because I cannot really remember names, so I would love to have a nomenclature on the glasses, but I would accept that it's totally unacceptable to have something in your face like this. So that would pass the creepy line. But now, apparently Google has said, okay, the creepy line does no longer exist, because what they did a couple of weeks ago is saying, we will now merge the data from our advertising unit with the login data and the personal data from our Google services. So which was basically one of the main arguments that has been holding up before, saying, okay, this whole advertising thing is totally harmless because it's not targeted and personalized onto you. So doesn't it counter your argument on that the society will have lines where they act and say, okay, this is something that we don't want? I mean, the Google Glass was a pro-argument for that, but now basically Google just saying, yeah, we don't really care about don't be evil anymore.
You know what I think is the key there? And again, not to put a caveat on it, but I'm about to put a caveat on it. People have to be made aware of the implications of what's happening. And I think this is one of the insidious things about software-powered changes to society, is that they're fairly instantaneous and almost invisible, unless you have honest actors out there letting people know about it, and you have an active media that is reporting on it. And of course, that's not always the case. Because if these things happen and they are a fait accompli, they're long completed, it's very difficult. The inertia we all would find it very difficult to give up our smartphones and our internet connections now, because we've become so reliant upon it. But I think most of us also only found out about the privacy concerns well after we became reliant on it. So I think
the needle has been in the arm already.
What's that?
The needle is in the arm already.
It has, but I think we still have a chance to have agency. It's just going to be harder, but that doesn't mean we can't do it. And so, yes, it does complicate things, but I don't think it makes it impossible. And plus, I don't see the point of giving up, and just saying, no, I guess this is how it is. I hear that all the time. People say, well, it's too late. I don't think that's the approach to take. And not that that's what you're saying.
No,
yeah.
certainly not.
Yeah.
So we will probably find out how deep this Cambridge Analytica things really is and how good it works. But it's certainly well known that there are manipulation techniques that are working against people. So there are methods of steering your attention. There are ways of getting your blood pressure up. And what we currently see is just the beginning of that. So, I mean, currently nobody has yet integrated the heart rate sensor in your watch with your newsfeed. So, I mean, this would be the next logical step. Or now the gamers are getting all notebooks with the integrated eye trackers. So the notebook is looking at where are you looking on the screen, because that's good for gaming, and it's totally cheap, very easy to do. Will be a standard feature in the next generation of notebooks, meaning that software on your computer can track what you're looking at, which has been a relatively expensive thing to do in research, which will become now very simple. So that means the number of data points that we get and the power of machine learning that we could apply to actually manipulating people automatically or semi-automatically raises. Is there a debate in science and psychometric science about participating in such endeavors, or is that something that is just happening under the wraps?
Well, there was a study recently where it was actually not a psychologist, who programmed a bot that punished people in social media for being racist. So you don't need humans anymore to tell people this is racist, don't do that. It was a bot who did that to restore the values of our society. I'm not quite sure about that. We will have an internet where different bots fight each other and then we stop using it. You know, I'm
so
not
you'd have
sure.
a racist bot and then a non-racist bot fight each other. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is that, first of all, I think what we mix up is that we talk about humans as like one big group. It is always that there's a quite large group that doesn't care. And for example, we had this big scandal where we heard from the news that the pharmacies sell our prescriptions to companies to know about our disease and the drugs we take. That was a couple of years ago. And it took a few days and it was gone again from the news. It had nothing to do with the internet. Maybe it's fast with the internet, but really it was about the prescriptions. And most people didn't care. So I think for most people, they just don't worry. And also about transparency. We could have a lot more of transparency, but people would not care. We need a few who are fighting, and we need to support them. We need to identify them and support them. And I don't think, if we always talk about the whole society and say, well, they don't look, they don't care, society was always like that. And that's not good, but that's the way it is. We need to support those who fight.
Agreed.
So you briefly skirted in future where social media becomes unusable because it's just full of bots fighting each other. Actually, in science fiction, this is a reoccurring theme in the last years, basically, there, where you have this group of heroes needing to accomplish a task, but the network is so dirty and so full of stuff that you cannot really expose yourself to, that there's one AI tasked with monitoring the network and filtering out information that's actually useful. And so is this a future that you think is plausible? So that you basically cannot have unmediated net access anymore because it's just full of bot and emotional manipulation and...
Yeah, I think it's definitely the future if you're talking about a monoculture or a system where there's a big investment. And I think I'm on the record a long time ago as saying that I really like the idea of this natural selection, how you have constant slow adaptation and change. I mean, even beyond the Microsoft update. I'm really interested in a lot of biological metaphors when it comes to software, because this is something that Mother Nature, that nature has been dealing with for hundreds and hundreds of millions of years, is this idea of parasites and viruses, and yet life does continue and useful activity is achieved. So I think our big lessons are in nature. Rather than having these monocultures that are very cost effective right up until somebody comes up with a killer bug that crashes everything. And the more uniform everything is, the bigger the chance of that. And so the internet has some vulnerabilities, as we've seen very recently, and especially with IoT devices being rolled out and people reusing a lot of the same protocols to connect these cheap things because they don't want to spend any money on it. I think there's going to be a big backlash from that.
Yeah, but I meant it basically in terms of information. So the human brain is sort of as we discussed already, slow thing.
Yeah.
And that means that the amount of information that we currently get presented is way more than we can actually process. I mean, most of us have this in our email inbox. We cannot read all the emails anymore, not just because of the spam, because just it's too much. So, and we cannot really read the whole Twitter feed of everybody we follow because that's way too much. Which means that we need probably AI-mediated information curation. So, which I'm now going to challenge both of you, because both of you said essentially, okay, we will cope with that with human facilities, with better
But
education.
isn't that in a way like representative democracy, where let's say you elect a senator or a congressperson to represent you? In this case, you're saying, we're going to find a trusted AI and we're going to set them loose to be an intermediary between me and the world. I could see that being useful, as long as you have some understanding of the chain of custody of that AI, and of course how it's going to change. That is interesting, I think.
You know, a smart guy wrote an article in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung this weekend, I remember, about liability. That technology comes fast in the beginning, and we don't talk about liability so much to not stop the development. But now there's the point where we have to do that. We have to talk about responsibility. And I think that will make a change. If we say this is too intense a debate or this is too much hatred in those networks and you're responsible for that and you have to act on that, I think this will also change society.
Who is responsible for that?
Well, those who offer the platform, have to be made legally responsible for what happens there, and I think that will change society as well.
So this is a very thin ice. I mean, because it touches basically freedom of expression in a very, very fundamental way. So basically in Germany there has been this debate about if you link to a website, are you then liable for that? And this has been a very heated debate, and also in the courts. And so basically making the platforms responsible for the content running on them is a difficult discussion. I mean, that's something where we probably could go on all evening. But I really like Daniel's idea saying, okay, maybe they should be responsible in making the content accessible to flagging, to saying, okay, this strand of discussion is emotionally intense, so basically I would like to have that for my email reader.
It's a heuristic,
Yeah.
so that you don't have to do all that footwork yourself.
Yeah.
It would flag things that you could then take a closer look at. And of course, it would have to be pretty accurate to be useful.
Well, I think that should be humans. I think if we say that the large part of our social life happens in social media, I don't think it should be the media or the companies to decide what is right or wrong and what is art and what is not art. I think then they should allow us as a society and our representatives to decide on that platform what can be justful, what can be art and what not. It should not be them to decide. And we see the.
But then it's kind of like a
that.
like button again. So we're back, isn't it?
No. I mean, like I would talk like something like an executive arm of the government, for example.
Okay, the representative.
The representative. It's not Facebook to decide this is hate and this is not hate, but it's us. And we decide on Facebook. They can offer the platform, but it is us who decides on the public space. If we talk about those flags, I would go much further.
Yeah.
I would say that we have to claim the whole space and say we decide what's going to happen here because we are the society, and it's not a company deciding for us what is good and what is bad.
The problem is there is no we in society anymore. I mean,
well, I would strongly disagree with that.
If you look at the election results we're having in most Western democracies, we have basically split societies. We have the people who have lost globalization and who really hate the system, and they certainly are not counting themselves as we anymore. And so what we classify as hate speech is for them freedom of expression. So this is something where we cannot walk into saying there will be an easy way for society to decide what is hate speech. And so I like Daniel's flagging idea much more, saying, okay, this is basically using concrete criteria to flag something as highly emotional intense or high probability of information to falsehood or whatever. And then you can set your input filters as you like, but
Who's flagging?
I think the flagging should be done preferably in my client under my control. And what I can do as a user, I want to control the technology. I don't want to rely on Facebook for that.
And that way, if it changes, you know the minute it changed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I'm with you.
But so an algorithm is helping you, or who's? I mean,
exactly.
Okay, you have an algorithm deciding for you.
Probably a couple do, but under my control that I run with apps that I install, not in the platform, not in a way that basically but that's just for my input control. That's just to keep me sane, essentially.
So if you were having problems with it and a friend said, well, mine is working pretty well, do you want to try it? You trust that person and you try
for
it.
Instance,
See.
So, But that doesn't solve the problem of hate speech in general, which is basically undermining people's reputation. So that's the other end. So the one end is basically it keeps me from thinking clearly because it makes me emotionally intense, and the other end is it undermines people's reputation. And this is something where it's a different, much more difficult discussion. But I want to come back to this technology shaping our thinking thing. Because the way when you look at people, how they use their smartphones and their gadgets, it is becoming much more intimate. So it is becoming, in a way, part of our brain that no one of the science fiction writers really imagined, interestingly. So most of the sci-fi AI, most of the sci-fi little helpers were basically stuff that were somewhere, or large machines, or shared things, and not stuff that was residing in our phones. And the interesting question is, why did sci-fi fail to see that, in a sense?
Probably looking at distant horizons. And I'm thinking that this was an intermediate destination. And I think that it was a fork in the road a lot of people weren't thinking about. Because, when I was younger reading a lot of science fiction, it was Ringworld, it was like the big things. It was just assumed, well, of course they're going to have those devices, and this was much closer at hand. And I think the world changed in a very unexpected direction. Now, there were probably some obscure Russian sci-fi writers who got it right. But yeah, I think most people did not anticipate that. But I always looked at doing sci-fi. A lot of people say that sci-fi is really about the times we live in now. It's never really about the future. And I tend to agree with that. You're working through some problems now by talking about the future, because hopefully people are more receptive to it as you do.
One question I wanted to ask you is...
Well, I can respond to that, because the thing about the smartphone is, that no one would ever have expected that we love cars. I think cars are something very unlovable. And the way that they were stroked on Sundays and washed and very carefully cleaned, and I don't think anyone would have expected that. And I think this is a very good example of how we get used to technology, because when I talk to people, they always tell me, what do you think about all these young kids? I sit at the bus station and see all the young kids with their smartphones, and I think it's so annoying they're all staring at their smartphones. And then I usually tell them, when I sit at a bus station, what annoys me most are those big things driving in front of me, being very noisy and putting all the pollution in my face. We get used to that and we love it. We don't do that so much anymore in Berlin, but many people still love cars, and what they do in front of our nose on the bus station is horrible. I have no idea why people do that. I think it's completely irrational.
I live in Los Angeles, so I think there's a few cars there.
So the question I wanted to ask you is, the way that people interact with technology has also always a certain aspect of paranoia. So when I look at when I'm doing talks or reading from books about privacy and NSA and that stuff, and I ask people, why are you coming here? So why are you here? And they say, many of them say, because this shoe advertising followed me around on the internet and that got me scared. So basically... So
they're rational, in other words.
In a sense, they're rational. They're basically making it become clear to them that they are being tracked around. So since you are working in this field, so what is the thing that people are actually worried about? So what are they getting paranoid about?
Well, the main reason for paranoia is if we cannot explain the world around us, and we rather take an untrue story than not having a story at all. That is a good reason for having a paranoia or having a delusion. And I think that is the problem, because we don't understand all that. We can't integrate it, and that makes some people paranoid. And I think it's important to talk about it. I mean, like Angela Merkel was the first big public person who spoke about her paranoia on the web on the CeBIT 2014, when she said that the advertisements are following her around. I think it's very important to say that, because I think it's basically the creepy line, that we were far over the creepy line, but we also add to that. We add to that with the panic we do to the people. We don't talk about it rationally. That's what I'm saying. We need to contain that. We need to talk rationally about technology, and we should not add to that panic. And I think that what we often do when we discuss technology, we discuss about all the evil things, and we bring people into panic. So that combined, this negative atmosphere combined with this big thing we don't understand, that can make people paranoid.
But that's not really good news, because people explain to people why the ads are following around, but explaining to them why their newsfeed that is written by an AI in 5 years is keeping their blood pressure constantly up by 20% is hard to explain. I mean, I can explain what is currently going on in technology, but the moment machine learning comes into game, it becomes extremely hard to explain. So so basically that's not good news then.
Well, I think there are two ways. One is curiosity, if you like to understand the stuff, and the other one is trust the people who do it, and that we need to have trustworthy people to do that. So people get much more paranoid about doctors as well, because medicine is becoming more complicated, and you read all these bad stories about doctors, so you have this combination of things you don't understand and news, don't trust those people, and then you get paranoid about your doctor, does he do the right stuff to me, and so on. So I think we need to restore trust, first of all, and then we can deal with an insecure future much better.
You know, actually, I think the Amish are interesting when it comes to this. And let me explain. A lot of people think the Amish have just a blanket religious proscription about technology past a certain era. And their attitude about technology is all fashioned on community, retaining their community. And so when new technology comes in, it's automatically excluded until they can agree that it won't shatter their community. So for this reason, the Amish do use advanced technology in their workplace. And I remember seeing a photograph of an Amish woman with the bonnet and the traditional garb programming, I think in Perl, on a CNC milling machine because it was during the day. And of course, then they went back home and they had 18th century technology again. So they were making a very conscious choice on which technologies they incorporated into their life, when they did it. And I think there's something to admire about that, because one of the things that I do with every new technology, I don't get comfortable with it until I know it's working for me. So if I have a device, until I can satisfy myself that it's mostly got my interests in mind, I limit its role in my life. I put it in an enclosure when I'm not using it so it can't listen in on me. I just assume the worst from any technology that I pull into my life now until I can prove otherwise. And that's probably, I think, a healthy attitude.
Yeah, well, I think we see, when we talk to people and do interviews, we see different strategies, and one thing that interested me was age, because I had the impression that many elderly people I see are much better at dealing with the technology. And I have the impression, we haven't interviewed so many yet because we just started, but that very young people are used to it. They don't worry because for them the complexity is already quite normal. And the elderly people, they don't worry because they use it as a tool. For them it's just a tool and that's it. So the worried generation is the one in the middle who has to adapt to it in a much more complicated way. Because it's at the center of their life, it's kind of symbiosis, but they did not grow up with that. And I think we need to focus on that one. It could be just a one generation problem, because the next generation, for them it's natural, and the older ones are like the Amish people you described just a little bit.
Right. There's actually a good point to that, because we also figured out that the people who have an oversharing problem, basically who are not really capable of steering what they publish on the internet, is actually this generation as well. So these are the people for whom the internet has been this great wonder that came just as they became adults, and who are really getting angry about it now that the internet is developing into something where it's not okay to share everything about themselves. So I would like to open up the discussion a bit. Do we have microphones in the audience? Thank you.
I just found it really, hello, Michael, my name. I found it funny that you ended with the sentence about the generations, the difference in them, how they react differently on new technology coming along. And I find it really funny that it's always mentioned that it's about the elderly. Well, you said it's probably the generation in the middle that has most problems, like with the internet and with I don't know, smartphones, things that we talk about now. But I think it's not like that. I worked on an app that was meant to keep people actually from using their mobile phones too much. And what we found was that the most demand we got was from youngsters. It was like from students trying to work hard, getting things done for themselves, and they had the feeling that technology was standing in the way sometimes. So it was not like the 30-year-olds, the 40-year, or even the older ones who couldn't adapt to technology, but it was the youngsters who felt that something is not right. So I would just try and not come up with this easy solution. That it's not so easy to rate on the generational problems there.
Spun your argument the other way around. These are actually people who recognize that they have a problem and try to do something about it?
Yes, but I mean, the main argument here was that you would just grow into it. So once you're just fully adapted to things, you accept them, and it's all fine. I would also, what I actually wanted to ask is, sorry, Jan Kalbitzer said earlier that maybe the main problem is that we just have to adapt to things. So I would say you didn't talk about the point that the networks that we talked about, that the platforms that we talked about, Facebook, Google, and all the functionality that we have at hand is constantly changing. So even if you adapt to something, while you do so, you said within 2 years, when you talk to people and you figured that afterwards they weren't depressed anymore using the internet. So if technology is changing so fast, like, is there really a way to adapt and to be happy with the status quo, or isn't it just a constant struggle to adapt to certain new functionality and platforms? And if I may add, no, I lost my line. I just shoot.
Maybe just.
Well, first of all, I also need to add to that with the younger people. I truly have big difficulties to believe in scientific studies, because I think that with scientific studies you can always prove what you want to prove. And usually we do scientific studies on 20 right-handed male medical students because they're at hand and they're very homogeneous, and we believe we can use them to say something about the whole society. We don't do that in our studies, but as I said, it's very few. It's not representative, and it can be much different if we continue. I said this is my first impression. And I agree to you, the students who work with me, who are younger, they are very focused on turning off the internet. They come in, they turn off their mobile phone, they start working for 6 hours, and then they turn it on and leave again. But I would agree to Frank that the awareness is a good thing. This is my impression, but this is not science. You have to. I'm not talking about studies now. This is my impression. And the way about adapting to the internet, I think that it's coming in bigger and smaller steps. And I think right now we're in a slower phase, so it's easier to adapt to things right now. But this is just my impression. So I have the impression that it was very intense in the beginning, and right now it starts to calm down. I don't get emails on the weekend anymore. I don't get emails at night anymore. I got all that a few years ago. I don't get angry emails anymore from colleagues. All these things change, so I believe there's an adaptation process. But I don't think, and I think I said that in my talk, I don't think we can judge that as scientists because it's too fast. And we see that if we add dimensions, for example, to the internet, it changes a lot. If it's three-dimensional, you have a different concept of the human being in front of you. You act different when it comes to moral, for example. There's just pilot studies where people see that they have much stronger moral feelings about people you see in 3 dimensions as opposed to a 2-dimensional conversation. But we're not fast enough for that. It changes all the time. But my impression is that right now the speed changed in a way, or we got used to the big step and we adapt better.
Okay, so, yeah.
So probably typical for an European, I still believe in enlightenment. So I tend the way for a solution, tend in the way of education. And my hope still is that there is a way to reach eye level with the technology behind this digitization, because there are principles, and of course the outcome will change every now and then, but there are principles, and as we learn to think or to move our rationality with techniques like dialectic thinking or different ways to get logic. Now we have to learn how data transforms or modulates reality and how to think to learn how machine thinks. And this, of course, leads to the idea of CS for all, computer science for all, and teach kids computational thinking. And do you think, especially probably to Jan and Daniel, do you think there's a way to reach this eye level?
I like to think there is. And the reason I say that, and again, we'll go into anecdotal, my personal experience in school was that a good teacher can achieve some amazing things. And the education that I got and a lot of the people with me in my class and in my school, you know, we did very well in the world, not necessarily financially, but what I mean is dealing with technology, I feel that basically let me back up. I do think if we fall back on basic logical structures, and this goes into what I was learning in school, which was formal logic, and I've used it so much and in so many ways, whether it's just in everyday life or in technology. And so it's weird how even if I was dealing with people or contracts, trying to sift truth or falsehood between various arguments or elements in written or oral communication is fundamental. And it doesn't matter whether it's an AI saying it to you or a person. And so I do think if we teach people those tools, we give people some tools to start grappling with these things in a more primitive manner, in primitive tools in the sense that they can be adapted instead of highly refined and evolved tools for one purpose. Almost go a step further down, and that has mass utility for anything we're going to run into. So that's why I brought up formal logic, because it's been around since going back to ancient Greece, and it is still around and very useful. So I do think we can achieve it. I think there's a lot of inertia and a lot of disbelief that it would be useful. A lot of people will probably react like, well, that's very old school. I don't think we should do that, especially, you know, we have this new software product that's going to teach kids. I read a study recently, and maybe somebody out here can Google it, but it was that scientific research, had found that children that dealt primarily with learning software on a tablet did less well in STEM, you know, science, math, and other disciplines than those who had a parent read to them. And a lot of the thinking behind it was that by reading to a child, that child can interrupt you and become further socialized and ask questions that nobody anticipated. They're not a passive consumer of it. They're active in it. And it built that type of agency that allows you to interact with your world and feel that you have a right and a reasonable expectation to do so. So that's why I feel that this is possible, that I'm optimistic about it. I think decision makers and people who fund education need to believe in it first. And I think that's really where the inertia lies, is because I know what a difference education made in my life, and also a little faith in me. I think about some of the classes that I took. In particular, one, there was an advanced literature course, and we were, 14 years old, reading very edgy books. And I remember thinking at the time, well, they're having faith in me to do this, and so I'm going to rise to the occasion. And so it's interesting how young people respond to education, especially a one-on-one relationship with another human being, a teacher. So I think we're just evolved to do that.
Yeah, I would add to that I think before we can regain autonomy, we need to regain joy. And yeah. I have great joy. I experiment a lot with the internet just to try out how it works. And my son uses this Sendung mit der Maus app a lot. He's 3 years old. And once he told me, Papa, we have to practice those sounds because he saw something about South Africa. And I like that. It's joyful. We need to have a joyful approach to that. And we need to, when you talk about eye level with the technology, I don't think we can understand all the algorithms. But we need to follow changes in our society. For example, I had someone who told me he believes that our relationship to death is changing by the internet, because of the internet, that we think about death in a different way. And then I started asking people I was talking to, how does the internet change our relationship to death? And then people start saying stuff like, in the non-internet life, things are more finite. And in the internet, you always continue with infinite things. And that gives you impression of infinity when you work online, as compared to being offline, where things usually are tasks that are completed. That can be true, it can't be true, but I found it fascinating to follow these thoughts. And he said that this is changing my relationship to death, because I always have the impression of infinity when I'm working with the internet all the time, and then death becomes a completely different category. So I think if you talk about eye level, we need to be curious what it does to us and how it changes our life, and then we can be on eye level, but we cannot understand all the algorithms behind it or stuff like that. I don't think we can have a lot of education, we won't be able, I don't think so.
Does it work? It does work, very well. I'm curious on the question of the nature of the human being and how thinking changes. Frank Schirmacher wrote a book which is called Minimum, and he made an argument how television changes society. And the long story short is that you can predict by the television people watch how many children they got. And the thought behind that is that he argues with the relationships, and that the media replaces the social relationships by replacing the emotional satisfaction for being in touch, for being connected, for the need of, I don't know the exact English word in German, it's Anerkennung. It's a very philosophical term, but very precise. So my question is on if I'm watching social media, I can determine a replacement of social relationships in any kind. I think this changes the kind of thinking and the kind of gathering communities. So what is your opinion to the fact of less liability, to long-term relations, to the ability to grow into not only discussions and opposite opinions, but to accept different people as in different entity due to the fact they don't agree with me? Is there changing, or does it change or does it not? What do you think on that topic?
Well, the first thing is about the television and the number of kids you have. If you would follow that logic, my name would be Thomas Müller, because this is an average, and we're not average human beings. This is an average amount of number of people have watched a certain show, and we are very widespread. So I don't think you can work with those arguments. I think that our social interactions do change. They change a lot, but I'm not sure they change to the worse. And the most important thing is we decide how they change. We design our social interactions. We decide how we use the internet. If we, as I said before, don't always follow impulses, but start to think about things and design them. And we have to get rid of anxiety as well and start to use it as momentum to design it as we want to. Most elderly people I talk to say they love about the internet, they love the pictures. They love to get the pictures. It's great to get the pictures. And there are a lot of great things about the communication. There are a lot of bad things. We decide. I think I'm not a prophet, I don't know how it will change us socially that we use the internet. We can decide. I'm not so worried about that.
Okay, next one.
I was surprised to hear you mention the Amish as a role model for how to deal with technology. No, not
they
because,
are hackers,
Not because they're the Amish, no. Because in order to have community decide what kind of technology to allow and what not to allow after they've tested whether it's useful to them, you need a very strong central authority. This is not a democratic system. This is a very fundamentalist, authoritarian system. And I was surprised to hear you mention that at an event that's called Reclaim Autonomy, because I don't think you can have one without the other. You can't have the Amish way of allowing or not allowing technology without that authoritarian system. So what was the idea behind that?
The idea behind it was not to literally mimic their society. It was that they were making conscious decisions. Now, you're right, in that case, it was a centralized authority making that. But I was simply saying that I try to make very conscious decisions about what technology I allow in my life and under what terms I allow it. And again, the Amish, their relationship to technology intrigues me because, again, they also try to find ways around those prescriptions. And I think their use of pneumatic home appliances, because they're not allowed to use electric ones, is an indication of that. So there's some elements of the Amish that I admire, but again, I would agree with you that that idea of a central authority, traditional role models, very strict, that's not really the part that I'm interested in. It was their conscious ingestion of technology under specific terms. I like to try to do that for myself rather than just coast along and say, hey, this is neat. I like to really think about what it does to me, how it changes my life, why the machine does what it does, so that there's no hidden agenda. So that's all I meant by that.
I have two remarks for that. One is, in American hacker scene, there's a surprising amount of refugees from the Amish communities. So the Amish actually create a surprising amount of hackers because they want to escape from this technology restriction regime. And they really into basically figuring out how things work. And the other thing is that the technology restriction and information restriction has always been an element of religions all the time. So the Catholic Church has been having a book index. So there has been numerous instances of religions trying to stem the tide of progress in terms of technology, and the Amish are just, how should I say that, a very visible part in terms of direct technology control. But if you look at them and meet them, then you figure out that, of course, that it's not as set in stone as it usually is. On the other hand, if we look at what happened with Google Glass, so Google Glass was one step too far for a relatively large community. Friends of mine have no glass holes on these premises signs on their on their gardens. And it's not that these people are technology averse, to the contrary. So if you walk into the house, you're having more wireless coverage than several countries have. But they don't want to have this one piece of technology. And I think that the point about developing social norms about what technology is acceptable and what technology use is acceptable is a very interesting progress. So for instance, when you look at kids, how do they adapt to this problem that now their parents have Facebook? So, which is a real problem, because previously they could post pictures from their parties and who kisses whom, not really problem. So, but now this has become a problem. And so what they do is very simple. They put up rules saying, okay, who makes a picture after 8 in the evening on a party, takes a picture with his phone, does not get invited to the next party, quite simply. And so this development of social norms around technology and the rejection of certain technologies is something that's one of the most interesting aspects for me to watch at society. For instance, smartwatches. So if you look at how many people bought a smartwatch when they came out, imagining all kind of interesting usages, and then after a while, so 2 months, 3 months, usually they're just somewhere. So not really being used except for very narrow use cases. So if you look at what the use cases are, they shrink down to something that a specialized device could do. And these types of looking at technology, commercially trying out technology, rejecting technology works relatively well. Where it doesn't work is when the technology itself is manipulative. When the technology itself has a sort of addictive effect. And social media is one of these things because it has this addictive effect of immediacy, of immediate feedback, of giving you instant gratification. And this is one of the dangerous things where I think we possibly cannot, as a society, say this will work out by itself.
Hi, is this working? Okay. I have two questions, and actually because the title is like how technology influences our thinking, and both of you talked a lot about emotions, but somehow we got lost. We didn't talk about emotions the last half an hour or something. So I'd like to go back a bit to talking about emotions in a sense. And one of the things that came to my mind is like when Facebook usually previously only had the like button, and then now we have like lots of other emotions that we can say. We have like, we have love, we have whatever, anger and stuff like that. I find that, I'd like to hear your opinion about that. Like, is that progress? Is that better because we have a wider range? Is that bringing differentiation into our discussions or not? Especially also from the psychology point of view, because, I mean, is that offering us more agency or not? I mean, I'd like to hear a bit of your thoughts about that. I mean, I have my own, but I'd like to hear yours. And that's one thing. And the other thing is, that's to you, Daniel. I read Influx, and one of the scenes that actually really left a very strong impression on me was when, so I don't remember the name of the main character, but when
Neither do I.
there you go. When he was caught and he was in the prison wherever, and he was always asked the same question, and basically he had to answer that question I mean, the AI wanted him to cooperate, and for that he had to answer the question in a certain way, and he didn't want to. But basically, the AI always came back with the same question every single day. I mean, so every single day. So, I mean, and the psychology of a human can't stand that. I mean, so at some point you break. But an AI doesn't have that kind of feeling. So I'd like to hear maybe you can explore a bit more in what way you think that technology is actually is feeling as emotionless or not. Yeah.
Okay. Should we start with the first one?
No, go ahead.
All right. With regard to the first one and the idea of having love and hate and these other things, I think that's, to me, and it's not to dismiss the question, I think it's just more granular data for Facebook. It's like they want, to break that down into different tranches so they can maybe make their advertising more effective. I don't know that gives people more agency. I don't know if you would feel different. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think it's just a data gathering mechanism that makes you feel, I guess, a little more appreciated. I don't know. But with regard, did you guys want to say anything more on that? Because I'll go for the influx question. And those scenes, again, in the book Influx, the main character, John Grady, is put in a very high-tech prison with an AI that mirrors him. So it sort of reflects mirror neurons, and it is trying to ingratiate itself with him and elicit information, very specific information from him in an unrelenting way with the complete dedication that only an AI could give. And so it's very inhuman, but the uncanny valley effect is extremely small because, of course, it's like him, sounds like him, acts like him, but it doesn't act human. And I'm not quite sure what was the question about that. That definitely occurred in the book. Were you saying that that's a risk to us?
Yeah, I think the question was basically when AI starts to interact with us in a human simulation way, do we have any defenses against that, in the sense that can we actually communicate with an AI that tries to emulate human behavior?
Are we talking a generalized AI?
No, but
right.
could
like
be
a
just,
really effective narrow AI?
Yeah, it could be just text generating stuff. So,
yeah.
Glorified chatbots. So what if we look at this, then I worry about it because if we look at the discourse in society, it is essentially a battle of intellectual bandwidth. So it is whoever can bring more brains and more time to a cause will eventually win. And the problem when this can be augmented by AI, basically
You multiply your voice.
exactly.
Yeah.
So which could yield to the problem that we cannot find basically any consensus anymore.
See, that leads me to think, okay, how do we solve that? And do you have a signature, another bot that looks for the signature of known AIs to weed out their arguments? So there's always this tit-for-tat battle.
So
Solved.
Okay.
We've solved it.
So we have been running out of time. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for the discussion that I really enjoyed that.
Likewise.
Thanks.
Thank you.